Hi guys, welcome to Grand Touring Automobiles, the home of Aston Martin in the province of Ontario. My name's Alec Ackerman, and I'm going to give you a guided tour today through the history of Grand Touring, not the brand, but the segment, and how it's evolved in collaboration with our security partner, SentinelOne. We're going to start our journey today with DB. Now, DB is more than just a naming moniker. It used to be the owner of Aston Martin back in the day. His name was David Brown, and he owned the company through one of its most famous stages. This was the stage that brought us historic cars like the DB4, which was piloted by none other than Stirling Moss himself. The DB5, which was probably most well known for being driven by the famous Sean Connery in the movies Goldfinger and Thunderball, and the DB6, which we actually have here today. Now, the DB6 came immediately after the DB5 and featured a larger interior cabin space. Now, that cabin space, interestingly enough, was the byproduct of a really changing market in the sports car world and the introduction of the Ford Mustang. This idea that you could travel across America and bring all of your friends with you. Now, that naturally didn't affect us in the sense of, hey, this is some competition, but it did affect us in the sense that we wanted to also be able to offer that to our clients. So, in turn, the DB6 got larger rear seats. It also had an interesting little aerodynamic piece on the rear, the introduction of aerodynamicism, a spoiler, which helped the car increase downforce and in turn made it better handling. The DB6 was owned by famous celebrities like Paul McCartney and also Prince Charles himself. Now, David Brown, that entire era, it was fantastic for motorsport, it was fantastic for the history books, but this was also more than just, I guess you could say, a component of our history. It was also the introduction, arguably, of an entire class of automobile, the Grand Tourer. If we fly back to the 1960s and the movie Goldfinger, you see Sean Connery piloting his beautiful silver birch DB5 through the famous Furka Pass. This was a perfect exemplification of Grand Touring, taking your beautiful GT car through a beautiful scenic valley and taking it down to the south of France or perhaps Italy. This is an entire segment that was designed and built around those. And the really incredible thing is how that segment has evolved. Its evolution is constant. We see it in the shape of the cars, we see it in the way that our engines are built. Now I want to talk about craftsmanship and essentially what goes into making an artisanally hand-built car. First and foremost, every single Aston Martin is indeed made by hand, and what that means is exquisitely crafted interiors. In the case of the DB11 we're standing next to, each of its seats takes just about 19 hours to assemble by hand. The leather that we source for the inside is the finest in the entire industry, and it comes from our partners, Bridge of Weir. We've used them since the 1960s when we started introducing our historic cars like DB5 and 6, and today our partnership is stronger than ever. We have so many different individual textures of leather and also contrast stitches, but the story doesn't stop with just the leather. With the DB11, we introduced something very new. We call this jewelry package, and allows you to choose the anodization for all of the billeted aluminum that goes inside of your car. So when you're holding those beautiful paddle shifters, or you're turning up and down the temperature of your instrumentation, all of this is genuine billeted aluminum in the color and feature of your choice. We can also do this in machined carbon fiber, which is really cool and also adds into that sporting credentials that our brand is very well known for. In addition to this, you can choose your veneers, classic veneers being wood, modern veneers being carbon, and one of our newest entrants, chopped carbon, which is very, very reminiscent of those beautiful Richard Mille watches. But instead of on a small watch, the entire veneer of your car. Genuinely impressive. One thing though, with regards to craftsmanship, you may not necessarily think of is the bonnet. So the DB11 has a very neat party trick. I'm going to go back to Merrick Reichman for a second, our chief of design. He's obsessed with simplicity, reducing complications, making things more beautiful by removing things. I think there was a fantastic quote that Steve Jobs once said, making simple things is exponentially harder than making complex things. This is the ethos that he uses for every single vehicle. The bonnet is a great exemplification of this. Usually when you look at the hood on a car, you see shut lines. Concept cars, cars that aren't actually built, don't have shut lines. The shut lines are where the bonnet would open. In the case of the DB11, I'm sure you've noticed, there are no shut lines. This was an intensive R&D process on our part to create what amounts to the largest single piece of stamped and pressed aluminum in the entire car industry. It is breathtaking. Now, this is a very difficult thing to do because headlights, according to NHTSA regulations, have to be mounted to the actual chassis of the car, which means we have to have holes for those headlights. And that means every single time that the front bonnet closes, it has to be absolutely perfect. So the solution? Soft close. First time ever on a production car. So it's perfect every single time. And that, of course, is in addition to it just being gorgeous and being able to see that awesome 5.2 liter twin turbocharged V12, it really is jewelry. Now that craftsmanship, that attention to detail in engineer is also very apparent on our newest SUV. The first SUV Aston Martin, in fact, has ever done in our company's 107-year history, the DBX. So let's unpack this. It's the first SUV in our company's history. This required a lot of work. In the case of DBX, an entirely new manufacturing facility, no longer in England, but in Wales. So now we're the Great British Car Company, as in we make our cars all in Great Britain. This also required an entirely new chassis. Now, chassis sharing in the industry, I should mention, it runs rampant. You see some brands, they'll have as many as 7 or 8 vehicles that sit on a single chassis. So the idea that we made it entirely bespoke one just for one vehicle is a big deal. It means that we can position the wheels where we want, stretched way out to the corners of the car. In fact, the wheelbase on DBX is longer than a full-size Range Rover, which is very impressive when you think that the actual length is approximately the same as a Porsche Cayenne or Lamborghini Urus. When you walk around the car, it's apparent a lot of the design cues from our historic past. The waterfall grille, the strakes on the bonnet, that are real. They actually operate as a genuine air intake. The side gills, which can be customized, it really is an Aston Martin design-wise. But does it drive like an Aston Martin? And how the heck did we do that if we, in fact, do have a car that drives like an Aston Martin? Well, it is an Aston Martin, so of course it drives like one. This is a three-pronged approach. The first of which is the fact that the car is the bespoke chassis. We can make the car of the materials we want, makes it very, very light. Aircraft-grade aluminum in this case. The second thing is its trick suspension system. Now, regular SUVs have spring coils. Some expensive SUVs have air coils. If you have had a car with an air suspension system before, you're likely to be familiar with the idea of a low mode, a regular mode, and a high mode. But the unique quality of DBX is that it has 3-chamber air suspension, the first in this class. And that means the vehicle has a total of 5 derivative ride heights. You have Terrain and Terrain Plus to raise the car up if you're finding yourself in the snow or in the mud. And then you also have Sport and Sport Plus, which can lower the car. And then finally you have your access height mode, which will drop it to the very, very lowest setting, make it very easy to get passengers in and out of. In its lowest setting, it's not unsimilar to some of those hopped up super sport station wagons on the market in ground clearance. Whereas in its Terrain Plus setting, it has almost as much ground clearance as the most formidable SUVs in the market. The next thing that we did, which is very, very interesting, is a feature called 48-volt anti-roll architecture. You may or may not have heard of this technology. Essentially what it amounts to is an electric drivetrain, but instead of propelling the car forward, it props the car up in corners. Very, very unique technology. It's the first time ever in the car industry that it has been featured on both the front and the rear chassis of the car. And they actually operate at twice the power of any previously used system. And the result of this is that when you enter into a corner at speed, the roll pitch of DBX is the same as our sports car Vantage. So you couple the advanced monocoque and construction, advanced air suspension technology, and then the advanced anti-roll architecture, we almost have a vehicle that's going to drive like one of our sports cars. But the final thing is the drivetrain, the way the actual car puts the power down to the road. And once again, Aston Martin is completely unique in that class. By default on DBX, 90% of its power is put to the rear wheels, just 10% to the front. Now it can send as much as 40% of that power to the front wheels in the case that you're driving over slush or snow. It'll get you out of any trouble. But then on the flip side of things, it's also the only SUV in class that can decouple its front axle to become 100% rear-wheel drive. 100% rear-wheel drive. The car essentially has a drift mode, which means when you drive DBX in a spirited fashion, it is very much a GT car. It is very much an Aston Martin DB car. It's just a bold new iteration of an ever-changing architecture, an ever-changing storyline. I want to go back to the DB6 for a minute. The DB6 is already a component of Aston Martin's DB heritage and the evolution. It started with DB4, fantastic racing grids. It moved to DB5, which was seen in the famous movies Goldfinger and Thunderball. Now at this point, we're talking about the Grand Tour more so, taking your friends with you. The DB11 is a modern exemplification of that same class, and it is very much a product of its time. The vehicle behind me, the DBX, is our next chapter. It's about going places we've never gone before, seeing things we've never seen before, and people who've never seen Aston Martin before. Thank you guys very much for going along with the journey today with me.